The auction yard buzzed beneath a cloudless sky, dust curling under boots and hooves. Old wood creaked under the weight of tradition, sweat, and speculation. It was the kind of day that made everything feel worn thin, faded denim, sunburnt shoulders, and spirits that had long been traded for something harder, more practical. Among the crowd of ranchers and buyers, men with weathered faces and sharp eyes, stood an old cowboy with a limp and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better years. His name was Eli Cutter, and he hadn't bid on a horse in almost a decade. Eli leaned against the split-rail fence, arms crossed, his boot tapping an uneven rhythm in the dirt. Nobody paid him much mind. He was just another relic from a time most folks were ready to forget. His shirt was sun-bleached, the buttons mismatched, and his hands bore the cracked, callous truth of a man who had lived more in silence than in speech. He didn't talk much, but he saw everything. The nervous twitch of a handler's hand, the way a horse held tension in its jaw, or the fear in its eyes hidden beneath blinks. That was his language now. The auctioneer's voice rolled like thunder through a tin can, sharp and fast. Next up, lot 47, $1 starting bid. A few laughs broke through the dust and heat. The gate clanged open, and out stepped a horse, so thin it looked like it had been sketched with a pencil. Its coat was patchy, dull, more gray than the black it was supposed to be, and a long scar traced its hind flank, like an old insult never forgiven. The creature blinked into the light, hollow-eyed and dragging one hoof with a limp that mirrored Eli's own. A ranch hand beside Eli snorted. Might as well put that poor thing out of its misery. Waste to feed. Or sell it for glue. Another quipped, laughing louder than he needed to. Eli didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He watched. The horse stood frozen in the center of the ring, legs trembling slightly, but head high, ears pinned but alert. There was defiance there, worn down, battered, but still breathing. Eli saw it before anyone else did. Not pride exactly, but something that hadn't given up. Not yet. $1, the auctioneer barked. Do I hear one? $1 for this fine specimen. A few more chuckles. A mock bid from a teenager who winked at his buddies. Silence followed. No serious buyer raised a hand. The horse shifted nervously, flinching at the jeering voices. Its ribs showed with every breath. The dust clung to its hooves like guilt. And then Eli raised a single hand. Heads turned. A few mouths dropped. One man muttered, "Is he serious?" Eli's voice was gravel-soft. $1. The auctioneer, more amused than pleased, slammed the gavel. Sold. To the gentleman with more guts than sense. Another round of laughter rolled across the yard, like heat off the gravel. Eli ignored it. He moved slowly, painfully, toward the gate where the horse was being let out. The handler shot him a questioning look, but handed over the frayed lead rope with a shrug. "You sure, old man?" he asked. "This one ain't got much left in him." Eli nodded once. Neither did I once. He approached the horse carefully, talking low. Words made more of breath than sound. "Easy now. No one's gonna hit you. Not anymore." The horse flinched as Eli touched its neck, but didn't pull away. It stood trembling under the cowboy's hand, not trusting, just not fleeing. And that, in Eli's world, was the beginning of something. He named the horse Dusty, not for the color, but for the way he moved, like he wasn't sure he existed until someone noticed him. Back at the small, wind-bitten ranch Eli still called home, Dusty stood in the shade of a collapsing barn. The fencing was bent in places, and the water trough was chipped, but it was quiet, peaceful. Eli led him into a corral, unlatched the rope, and let the horse take in his new world. Dusty limped slowly, head low, sniffing the ground, side-eyeing the fence as if it might close in on him. He didn't run. He didn't buck or snort. He simply stood, blinking in the silence like it was a language he didn't know. Eli watched from the gate, his back aching more than usual. His joints had opinions about the day's decisions, but his heart was steady. That was rare. In the distance, a coyote yipped. The wind carried dry grass, and the smell of coming rain. Dusty raised his head at the sound and looked to Eli, just for a second, not with trust, but with awareness. He knew Eli was there. He knew he wasn't alone. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the world in copper and shadow. Eli sat on the porch with a mug of weak coffee, boots crossed at the ankle. Dusty stood near the barn, silhouetted against the fading light. He hadn't moved much. Eli hadn't expected him to. He didn't need the horse to be strong yet. He just needed him to be there. Because Eli Cutter knew something no one else at that auction had bothered to notice. Broken things don't stay broken. Not if someone sees them. Not if someone believes they're worth fixing. And though the laughter still echoed in the back of his mind, it was fading now, just noise. The kind people make when they don't understand what they're looking at. He'd heard it before, decades ago, when a young cowboy with a busted leg and a busted heart tried to start over on land no one wanted. He remembered how it felt to be looked at and dismissed in the same breath. Dusty didn't need to be perfect. He just needed a chance. So as the sky slipped from orange to deep velvet, Eli whispered into the cooling wind, "We've both been thrown out, haven't we, boy? But we're not done yet." Dusty turned his head slowly, the setting sun catching in his dark, unreadable eyes. He didn't respond, but he stayed. And sometimes that was enough to begin with. The mornings came slowly now, painted in pastel light and laced with silence. Eli woke early, as he always had, though age had turned each sunrise into a negotiation with his bones. He winced as he swung his legs over the side of the cot, the old cabin creaking like it, too. Resented movement. Outside, the wind whispered through dry weeds, and the occasional thud of hooves told him Dusty was still there, still alive. That was enough to keep him going for now. He found Dusty standing by the fence, where the early sun had warmed a small patch of dirt. The horse's coat still lacked shine, but there was something new in his posture. His neck arched a little higher, his ears flicked with more interest. Eli held a tin pail of oats in one hand and a brush in the other, the bristles worn nearly flat from years of service. Dusty eyed both cautiously. Eli didn't approach right away. Instead, he settled himself on the lower rail of the fence, letting the oats rest within reach, but untouched. "Not in a hurry," he murmured, voice low and steady. "Don't reckon we need to be." It took 20 minutes for Dusty to close the distance. Step by cautious step, the horse crept forward, nostrils flaring, eyes locked on Eli like he might disappear. He took a bite, then another, until the pail was empty. Eli didn't reach out. Not yet. Trust had its own timeline. After the feedings came the brushing. Light, slow strokes that stirred clouds of dead hair and dust into the air. Dusty flinched at first, but he didn't bolt. He stood, trembling slightly, while Eli worked the knots from his mane. Under the grime, Eli found a scar along the horse's neck, a faded burn, maybe from a rope, maybe worse. He said nothing, just softened his touch, letting silence speak for him. Days passed like this, folding into one another. Eli worked the land in short bursts, mending fence posts, patching the leaky roof, hauling water from the well. Each motion was deliberate, made heavier by time, but he did them anyway. Dusty watched him often now, following with his eyes, sometimes even his steps. The horse had begun to graze with more confidence, his movements still uneven, but purposeful. One afternoon, a truck kicked up a plume of dust on the long driveway. Eli squinted as it approached, shielding his eyes. The engine rattled to a stop near the gate, and a young woman stepped out. Tall, lean, sun-kissed, she moved with the casual grace of someone raised around animals. She wore a sheriff's badge on her belt. "Eli Cutter," she called, adjusting her hat. He nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's what they still call me." "I'm Deputy Hart. Folks in town said you picked up a horse at auction last week. One that should have been put down." Eli's expression didn't change. "Town talks too much." She looked past him at Dusty, who stood near the barn with his head raised, alert but not spooked. That horse belonged to the McGreevy Ranch, was abandoned after the fire. Rumor is he was beaten near to death before they left. Eli's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "You planning to train him?" she asked, stepping closer, her tone shifting from official to curious. "I'm planning to listen," he said. "That's all he needs right now." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "If you need help, supplies, medicine, I can ask around." Some folks still remember what you did for this town. I didn't do it for them. No, but they might help anyway. He didn't reply, and she didn't push. She climbed back into her truck, leaving behind a faint offer wrapped in dust. That night, Eli stood by the corral, staring up at the stars. Dusty moved beside him, brushing his muzzle lightly against the cowboy's shoulder before backing away. It wasn't affection exactly, but it was something. A choice. Eli watched the horizon, voice low. You ever wonder why some things survive fires, boy? Not 'cause they're strong, but 'cause they're too damn stubborn to burn. The days grew warmer. Dusty's limp improved slowly, though he still favored his left leg. Eli began walking him in circles, using a long rope and gentle commands. He didn't push hard, just enough to remind the horse that movement was still an option. Some afternoons, Eli would sit on the fence, recounting old rodeo stories to the air, memories of broncs and arenas, of falling and getting back up. Dusty would listen, ears flicking with the rhythm of the voice. Whether he understood didn't matter. It made Eli feel alive. But healing was never a straight path. One morning, something snapped in Dusty. Maybe it was a crow's sudden flight, or the scent of smoke drifting from a neighbor's burned pile. Whatever it was, it cracked the fragile trust they'd built. Dusty reared back in the corral, kicking wildly, eyes rolling with panic. He struck the gate hard, cracking a board and tearing a gash along his hind leg. Eli moved as fast as his body allowed, slipping into the corral without hesitation. He didn't try to restrain the horse. Instead, he stood in the dust, hands out, voice low. It's all right. You're all right. Dusty circled him, breathing hard, nostrils wide, but didn't strike. He slowed, step by step, until he stood still, shaking. Eli reached out and touched his neck, steadying him. They stood like that until the storm passed. Eli cleaned the wound, muttering reassurances, while Dusty stood quietly, resigned but present. As he wrapped the leg, Eli caught his reflection in the horse's dark eye. Older, worn, but still here. Still willing. By the time the sun set, Dusty was back in his usual spot near the barn, grazing slowly. Eli sat on the porch again, mug in hand, watching the dark settle in. He could feel it now, the shift. A corner turned, however small. Dusty had bolted, but he'd returned. That was a choice, too. And choices were how trust was born. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Rain was coming, maybe tomorrow. Eli welcomed it, because they were no longer strangers, he and that horse. They were survivors. Rain slicked the fields in heavy sheets, turning the hard-packed earth to mud and drenching the hills beyond the corral. Eli stood in the barn's open doorway, the scent of damp hay and wet wood thick in his lungs. Dusty shifted restlessly behind him, ears twitching at every gust of wind. The storm had rolled in fast, fierce, and it stirred something in both of them, an unease not born of weather but of memory. Eli lit the lantern and hung it from the central beam, casting a warm, flickering glow over the stall. Dusty stepped inside without prompting, head lowered, hooves squelching in the soft straw. His coat was darkened by rain, the muscles beneath it still lean, but no longer trembling. The limp was almost gone now. Whatever had broken in the horse's body had begun to knit itself back together. Still, there were deeper wounds, the kind that didn't bleed. Eli knew them well. He worked in silence, toweling the gelding down with an old grain sack, methodical and slow. Dusty didn't flinch. Trust had taken root, fragile and quiet, like the first green after winter. And yet Eli could feel it. Something was coming. Something that would test whatever they'd built. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and a world that felt momentarily new. Eli led Dusty out early, watching as the horse trotted toward the far end of the pasture. No hesitation in his steps now. No signs of pain. Just motion. Freedom. The peace didn't last. Later that afternoon, a truck pulled into the drive, bigger than the deputies. Newer. The engine idled for a beat before shutting off, and from it stepped a man in clean jeans and a polished belt buckle. His hair was slicked back, his smile tight and practiced. Eli stiffened before the man even reached the porch. "Well, I'll be," the man said, looking around. "Didn't expect you to still be alive out here, Cutter." Eli didn't smile. Who's asking? Name's Wayne McGreevy. My family used to run cattle up near the ridge. You've got one of our horses. Eli's eyes narrowed. You mean the one you left to die at the auction yard? Wayne shrugged, unbothered. Wasn't my choice. My old man got jumpy after the fire. Thought the horse gone mean. But now I hear he's still walking. That true? Eli said nothing. Wayne chuckled. Figures. Tough stock. We bred him from a stud out of Texas. Expensive lineage. If he's sound again, I'd like him back. He's not yours anymore. I've got paperwork that says otherwise. You signed him over with the others. The sheriff saw it. Doesn't change what's right, Wayne said, eyes narrowing. That horse is worth something now, and I don't intend to let some washed-up cowboy profit off my bloodline. Eli stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He's not for sale, and he damn sure ain't going back to someone who taught him fear. Wayne's jaw worked, but he held his tongue. Instead, he tipped his hat, eyes cold. This ain't finished, Cutter. He drove off, the tire spitting gravel in protest. Dusty watched from the far fence line, body tense, as if sensing the echo of something that had once hurt him. Eli sighed. Trouble had found them, just as he feared. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window with a rifle across his knees, watching the shadows shift outside. Dusty paced in his stall, restless but silent. The rain had left the air heavy, and in that stillness, the past crept close again. Morning broke with no incident. But Eli knew men like Wayne. If they couldn't win with charm, they'd win with pressure. 2 days later, a county official arrived, papers in hand, citing ownership disputes and vague threats of seizure. Eli sent him away, but the message was clear. Wayne was coming back, with leverage. Eli sat in the pasture that evening, Dusty grazing beside him. The air was warm, the wind gentle. For a while, they said nothing. Then, softly, Eli spoke. I know you've been through worse. I see it in your eyes. But I won't let him take you. I swore when I brought you here, we either heal together, or we don't heal at all. Dusty looked at him, ears turning forward, and nudged Eli's shoulder. They had made their choice. The next morning, Eli hitched the trailer he hadn't used in years. It took effort, every crank and latch resisting him, but he got it done. Dusty walked in without protest. Something in the horse had shifted, less fear, more faith. The road wound through canyons and high desert, the trailer swaying gently as they moved. Eli didn't tell anyone where he was going. Didn't need to. He had a plan, one he hoped would outpace Wayne's reach. He arrived at the deputy's ranch just before sundown. Hart was surprised to see him, but not unkind. I need help, he said plainly. Legal help. Someone who can make sure that bastard doesn't touch a hair on that horse again. She nodded, eyes narrowing. You'll get it. They moved Dusty into a secure paddock behind the station. Eli slept in his truck that night, the old ache in his spine returning. But he slept soundly, knowing Dusty was safe for now. The next few days were a blur of signatures, affidavits, and phone calls. The sheriff backed Eli's claim, citing abandonment and the vet's assessment of prior abuse. Hart dug up old complaints tied to the McGreevy property, patterns of neglect that painted a clearer picture. Wayne showed up once more, this time in a suit, armed with a lawyer and a thin smile. But the law wasn't on his side anymore, not with everything that had come to light. In the end, the judge ruled in Eli's favor. Dusty was his, officially and finally. Outside the courthouse, Eli didn't celebrate. He just leaned against the trailer as Dusty nosed at his hand. The fight was over, but scars remained. They drove home in silence, the sun sitting behind them, casting long shadows across the land. Dusty stood tall in the back of the trailer, his gaze forward. Back at the ranch, Eli opened the gate and watched the horse gallop into the field. Not a limp, not a flinch. Just power, grace, survival. The past had chased them, snarled at their heels, but it hadn't won. Eli stood alone in the twilight, hands in his pockets, heart full and aching. He wasn't a young man anymore, and he didn't know how many more storms he could weather. But for now, for this moment, he had peace, and a horse that had once been broken was whole again. They both were. The morning fog clung to the grass, like ghosts reluctant to leave. Eli stepped out onto the porch with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a leather-led rope in the other. His joints protested, but he ignored them, his eyes fixed on the paddock where Dusty stood, statuesque in the dew-soaked dawn. The horse had filled out over the last few weeks, ribs no longer stark beneath his hide, his coat rich and dappled with health. But something inside him remained coiled, cautious. Not fear exactly, but watchfulness, a trait Eli understood better than most. He walked slowly into the pasture, letting the gate close behind him without the clank of metal. Dusty turned his head, ears swiveling, then resumed grazing. Eli didn't call to him. Instead, he sat cross-legged a few feet away and unscrewed the thermos cap, letting the smell of hot coffee drift into the morning air. "You know," Eli said, voice quiet, "I was a boy not much older than a sapling when I saw my first Mustang. Wild thing, lean and mean, and she ran like wind on fire. My pa told me horses like that couldn't be caught unless they chose to stay. I never forgot that." Dusty's tail flicked. He lifted his head again, staring at Eli for a long moment before stepping closer, slow and deliberate. Eli didn't move, not even when the horse's breath fogged in front of his face. Dusty lowered his muzzle to sniff the rim of the thermos. Eli smiled faintly. "You chose to stay, didn't you?" They were making progress. Healing wasn't a straight path, but there were markers along the way, like this one. Still, Eli couldn't shake the tension building in his gut. He'd won the legal battle, secured Dusty's freedom, but Wayne McGreevy wasn't the type to disappear quietly. Men like him didn't forget being outmaneuvered. They brooded. They waited. That afternoon, Hart stopped by unannounced. She leaned against her cruiser as Eli leaned against the porch rail, both of them silent for a beat, listening to the wind. "You know," she said finally, "McGreevy's been poking around again. He's not going through courts this time." Eli's jaw clenched. "What's he trying now?" "Rumor says he's trying to buy up your neighbor's land. Wants to pressure you out. Says he's planning to build something big. A riding arena, maybe a guest ranch. Glossy brochures. A lot of city investors. He's trying to push you off this ridge." Eli looked out toward the horizon. The land was quiet, sacred in its way. It didn't take much imagination to see it spoiled. Bright lights where stars should be. Strangers trampling over pastures. Dusty locked in a stall to impress tourists. The thought made his stomach turn. "He won't stop," Eli muttered. "Not until he's taken everything." Hart nodded. "I know, but he's not invincible. If he wants to build on this land, he needs access, permits, local approval. I've already heard grumbling from old-timers down at the cafe. They don't like him." "That won't stop money," Eli said. "No," Hart admitted, "but it slows it down, and people listen to stories out here. You tell them what happened to that horse, what Wayne did." Eli shook his head. "They won't care." "They will," Hart said. "You just have to let them." The idea sat with him long after she left. For most of his life, Eli had been content with silence. But maybe this time, silence wasn't strength, it was surrender. The next morning, he walked into the diner, a place he hadn't visited in years. Heads turned. Forks paused in midair. The smell of bacon and coffee curled through the air, familiar and grounding. He made his way to the counter, set down a stack of printed photos, before and after shots of Dusty. Bones and bruises in the first, muscle and light in the second. He cleared his throat, and the low murmur of the room faded to stillness. "I don't usually speak much," he began, "but some things need saying." He told them about Dusty, how he found him broken, how he watched him mend. He told them what Wayne had tried to do, what he still might do. "He's not just after my horse," Eli said, voice rough with truth. "He's after the kind of life we've kept out here. The quiet, the space, the honesty. He wants to turn it into something shiny and shallow. I ain't asking for much, just that you see him for what he is." A long silence followed, then a nod, then another. Old men with calloused hands, women with knowing eyes. No applause, just solidarity. Back at the ranch, things felt different. Dusty was calmer, more settled, as if he, too, could sense the shift in the air. But peace was always temporary. That night, Eli woke to barking, panicked, frantic. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, just in time to see headlights bouncing down the far trail and the flash of firelight near the south fence. The scent hit him before the sound did. Smoke. He ran, boots pounding earth, lungs burning. A section of the fence line was ablaze, flames licking at dry weeds, spreading fast. Dusty whinnied in the distance, fear ringing in his cry. Eli didn't hesitate. He grabbed a shovel from a shed and began digging a firebreak. He beat at the flames until his arms gave out, until water from the well drenched the dirt and smoke choked his vision. When it was finally over, the fire was out. Half the fence was gone. But Dusty was safe, and Eli was done waiting. The next day, he filed charges. Hart took photos of the damage, and this time there was evidence. Tire tracks, accelerant traces. Even Wayne's money couldn't bury that. The investigation began, slow and procedural. But the town rallied behind Eli. Volunteers rebuilt the fence. Someone left a bag of oats on his porch. Strangers came by to offer help. He wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long while, Eli didn't feel like a relic from another time. He stood in the pasture as Dusty approached, gentle and steady. The horse lowered his head, touching Eli's chest with his muzzle. The battle wasn't over, but something deeper had shifted. The land had spoken, and this time, it had chosen to remember. And Eli knew, no matter what came next, they were ready.